Have you ever made a decision you thought was right, only to realize later it cost you the one thing your heart truly needed? Tonight's story isn't just about a millionaire, a maid, or a dance. It's about ego, awakening, and the moment a man realizes he fired the wrong person from his life. In a world built on success, numbers, and outward achievement, we often assume that wealth can solve anything. Money buys houses, comfort, luxury, and status, but what it cannot buy is the ability to face your own heart. This is the exact truth the millionaire in our story discovers, though far too late. He lived in a mansion full of art, expensive furniture, and rare collections, yet inside those walls, he hid the one thing he could never afford to confront: himself. For years, he convinced himself that emotional vulnerability was a weakness. He grew up believing that feelings were distractions, that tenderness belonged to people without ambition. So he built his world carefully, surrounding himself with efficiency, rules, and boundaries so rigid that nothing unexpected could enter. And for a long time, he believed his life was perfect. He had power, influence, and control over everything around him. But life has a way of slipping emotions into the smallest cracks. When the young maid entered his home, she didn't bring chaos, noise, or problems. Instead, she brought the quiet kind of presence that unsettles a guarded heart. She worked silently, respectfully, without ever intruding on his space. Her innocence wasn't loud, but it was felt. She was humble, soft-spoken, and carried an authenticity that stood in stark contrast to the polished, artificial world he had built. Initially, he told himself that her presence didn't matter. She was just an employee, someone hired to keep the house running. But gradually, he found himself noticing things he shouldn't have noticed. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when concentrating, the soft hum of her voice as she worked, the calm, natural kindness she offered without expecting anything in return. For a man whose life revolved around transactions, it was terrifying. Because she gave without wanting, and he was not used to receiving anything freely. Every time she passed him in the hallway, his chest tightened. Every time she greeted him with a gentle "Good morning, sir," something inside him responded, something he didn't understand. She reminded him of a version of himself he had lost along the way. A version that once believed in sincerity, warmth, and the simple truth of emotions. And this frightened him more than any business threat ever had. Instead of acknowledging the change happening within him, instead of admitting that he was drawn to her purity, he did what emotionally unready people often do. He pushed her away. He looked for excuses, for flaws, for reasons to justify the discomfort she made him feel. In reality, she broke through the armor he had spent years building, and he didn't know how to handle it. He mistook vulnerability for danger, but the truth is clear. Emotional honesty is the foundation of real human connection. Without it, even the richest people live in emotional poverty. The millionaire had bank accounts filled with wealth, but his heart was empty. His home echoed with loneliness because he never allowed anyone close enough to leave an imprint. The maid did nothing wrong. She simply existed in a way that exposed his emotional starvation. Her kindness highlighted the coldness within him. Her simplicity highlighted the complexity of his fears. Her sincerity highlighted how fake and forced his world had become. Instead of embracing these realizations, he lashed out. He convinced himself that firing her would restore his balance, that removing her would remove the feelings he didn't know how to navigate. But this decision only proved one thing: he had money, but no emotional maturity. And this is the tragedy of many powerful people. They are trained to conquer the world, but never taught to understand themselves. They learn how to negotiate deals, but not their own hearts. They master control, but avoid vulnerability. They build empires, yet struggle with basic human truth. The millionaire learned, too late, that denial doesn't destroy emotions. It only postpones their consequences. When he fired her, he believed he was reclaiming control. Instead, he was creating a wound he didn't yet know existed. Because the heart does not follow the logic of the mind. You can remove a person from your home, but you cannot remove the imprint they leave on your thoughts. You cannot silence the memory of their presence simply by pushing them away. Wealth can shield you from many things: hunger, struggle, insecurity. But it cannot shield you from emotional truth. It cannot protect you from longing or regret. It cannot erase the moments that touched you when you weren't paying attention. And that is why wealth can never replace emotional honesty. Emotional honesty is the courage to admit that someone matters, that something affects you, that your heart is speaking even when your mind is afraid. Without it, love becomes impossible, connection becomes shallow, and life becomes an empty performance. The millionaire had everything except the one thing that could have saved him from himself: the courage to say, "She made me feel something, and that scares me." Until he learns that truth, all the wealth in the world will never fill the silence she left behind. Innocence is powerful not because it tries to be, but because it simply is. It has no agenda, no strategy, no manipulation. It doesn't compete, doesn't pretend, and doesn't demand anything. Innocence is silent truth. And that is exactly why it unsettles people who have spent their lives hiding behind masks. For the millionaire, the young maid represented something he had lost long ago: sincerity. She did not carry the weight of the world in her eyes. She did not calculate every word before she spoke. She did not walk with the guarded caution of someone who had been betrayed, used, or hardened by ambition. Instead, she moved through the mansion with a softness that was almost foreign to him, a purity that wasn't weakness, but strength. Every day, she greeted him with the same gentle smile, not because she wanted anything from him, but because that was who she was. And in that simple sincerity, she unintentionally revealed the truth of his own emotional emptiness. People who live in cold environments grow accustomed to the temperature. He had lived so long without tenderness that he forgot what warmth felt like. But then she entered his world, and suddenly, the chill within him became noticeable. Her presence illuminated the room in ways expensive chandeliers never could. She didn't try to impress him. She didn't flirt, exaggerate, or seek attention. She simply existed with a quiet dignity that made him question everything he had become. Innocence has a way of acting like a mirror, not the kind that reflects your appearance, but the kind that reflects your soul. Whenever she looked at him, he felt seen not as a millionaire, not as a boss, but as a human being. And that terrified him more than he would ever admit, because deep down, beneath the layers of power and pride, was a man who did not know how to handle being emotionally visible. He found himself watching her when she wasn't looking, not out of desire alone, but out of fascination. She moved with lightness, not because her life was easy, but because she chose not to let hardship turn her bitter. She spoke with kindness, not because she didn't know pain, but because she refused to let pain define her. Innocence is not naivety. Innocence is choosing goodness even when the world gives you reasons not to. And that truth, her truth, made him uncomfortable. People like him, surrounded by wealth and responsibility, often forget the simplicity of genuine human emotion. They trade authenticity for efficiency, empathy for power, and vulnerability for control. He built his empire by being sharp, strategic, and emotionally distant. But she, without trying, reminded him of everything he lost in pursuit of success. Her honesty made his guardedness look excessive. Her kindness made his coldness obvious. Her humility made his pride feel heavy. He could not understand why someone with so little carried so much peace. Why someone who had no riches seemed richer in spirit than he had ever been. Every time she smiled at him, he felt something shift inside, a mixture of admiration and fear. He wasn't afraid of her. He was afraid of what she awakened within him. She made him aware of the void he had spent years pretending didn't exist. She made him realize that the luxury surrounding him couldn't hide the loneliness sitting quietly at his table. She made him see that despite all his achievements, he had failed in the most basic part of being human, staying connected to the truth within himself. Innocence exposes truth by showing us what we no longer are. And that realization hurt him more than any financial loss ever could. He began overthinking everything, every reaction, every interaction, every small moment. Why did her laughter linger in his mind? Why did her sadness affect him more than it should? Why did he feel an unfamiliar heaviness whenever she passed by without looking at him? He feared these questions because they forced him to acknowledge emotions he had buried. Emotions he didn't want to deal with, emotions he wasn't prepared to name. But innocence doesn't negotiate. It doesn't wait for permission to be felt. It simply reveals, and once truth is revealed, it becomes impossible to ignore. The more he watched her, the more he realized that her innocence came from a place of strength, not fragility. She was unbroken, despite the challenges she must have faced. She was uncorrupted, despite living in a world that often rewards manipulation over sincerity. She was confident in quiet ways he didn't understand, and in her presence he felt small, not because she diminished him, but because she reflected the emotional depth he lacked. Her innocence was not a flaw, it was a force. One that stripped away the layers of sophistication he used to hide his vulnerability. One that made him confront the loneliness he denied. One that revealed the truth he didn't want to see. He was a powerful man with an impoverished heart. Innocence does not need to shout to reveal truth. It simply stands beside you quietly, gently, until you can no longer avoid the parts of yourself you've tried to forget. And in his case, her very presence was enough to make the truth impossible to ignore. Ego is a dangerous thing. It whispers lies in moments of discomfort, telling us we are right even when we are wrong, strong even when we are breaking, in control even when our hearts are slipping away from us. For the millionaire, ego was not just a habit, it was a shield he had used his entire life to survive the pressure of power, expectations, and success. But ego is a shield that cuts the one who holds it. The decision to fire the maid did not come from logic or reason. It came from a place of emotional panic, a place where pride fought vulnerability, and pride, as it often does, one in the most destructive way. The moment she began affecting him emotionally, he felt exposed. She stirred things inside him he didn't want to examine: tenderness, curiosity, longing, connection. He didn't know how to translate those feelings. He didn't even allow himself to admit them, so instead his ego went into defense mode. Ego creates illusions. Ego makes problems appear where there are none. Ego transforms innocent moments into imagined threats. A simple smile from her became distraction. A moment of eye contact became disrespect. Her presence became disturbance, not because she did anything wrong, but because she made him feel something right, and that terrified him. He convinced himself that removing her would restore order. He told himself it was a professional decision, that he needed distance, that she was not essential. Ego always provides excuses dressed as logic. It always whispers, "You must stay in control," even when control is the very thing choking the heart. And so, he fired her, not out of anger, but out of fear. Not because of her mistakes, but because of his emotions. But here is the truth that life teaches us again and again. Decisions made from ego are the ones we regret the most. The moment she walked out the door, something shifted inside him. The silence felt heavier. The house felt colder. The absence of her presence, the soft footsteps, the gentle humming, the warmth she unknowingly brought became painfully loud. You never truly understand the value of a person until their absence echoes through your everyday life. At first, he tried to justify it. He tried to believe he had done the right thing. He buried himself in work, meetings, business calls. But even the most powerful men cannot outrun the consequences of emotional decisions. Ego wins quickly, but the heart loses slowly and deeply. The regret began quietly, a thought of her, a memory of her, a habit of glancing at the places where she used to stand. He found himself looking at the staircase at the times she usually passed by. He noticed how the kitchen felt too still without her morning greetings. He realized how the mansion's luxury could not fill the space she had unintentionally occupied. regret grows in silence. It starts small, then takes over everything. He replayed the moment he fired her again and again in his mind, the fear in her eyes, the confusion, the way she tried to stay composed even when hurt. He remembered the way her lips trembled, the way she nodded respectfully despite the injustice, the way she walked away with dignity he didn't deserve. That memory became a wound he couldn't heal. Ego had protected him in the moment, but now it was gone, and all that remained was emotional clarity. He realized he wasn't fighting her. He was fighting himself, his fear of attachment, his fear of vulnerability, his fear of being seen as human, not powerful. And because he feared these emotions, he punished the wrong person. The heart has a way of making us feel the cost of our worst decisions. It does not forget. It does not forgive easily. It does not care about pride or prestige. It only knows loss and teaches through it. The millionaire learned slowly, painfully, that ego-driven choices create long-term damage. They push away the people who bring light and pull us deeper into the loneliness we refuse to acknowledge. He began to see the truth more clearly if he had been honest with himself, if he had allowed vulnerability instead of fighting it. If he had paused before reacting, he wouldn't have lost the one person who brought warmth into his rigid world. But ego doesn't pause. Ego reacts. Ego destroys first and reflects later, and reflection is where regret lives. Every day, he woke up aware of the emptiness left behind. Every night, he wondered what would have happened if he had chosen courage instead of pride. And every passing thought reminded him that he had made a mistake not because she was gone, but because he was the one who forced her to leave. The deepest regrets are not born from what others do to us. They are born from what we do to ourselves. And his regret was a wound he created with his own hands, guided by ego, sealed by pride, and reopened every time he remembered the softness of her presence that he pushed away out of fear. There are moments in life when comfort blinds us, when routine becomes a shield, when the presence of certain people feels so constant that we forget how deeply they shape our days, until the moment they are no longer there. Loss has a way of revealing truths we never expected to face. It cracks open the walls we built around ourselves and forces us to look inside, sometimes for the first time in years. For the millionaire, transformation did not begin while she worked in his mansion. It began after she left. Loss became the mirror he couldn't avoid. When the maid was in his life, her presence blended naturally into the rhythm of his home. The warmth she carried softened the cold edges of his rigid world. Yet he never truly understood the impact she had on him, not until the silence of her absence settled into the halls of the mansion like an uninvited guest. Everywhere he went, something felt missing. The morning greetings she used to offer were gone. The sound of her careful footsteps no longer echoed faintly through the hallways. Even the air felt heavier, as if the house itself sensed her departure. Loss is strange like that. It magnifies what we ignored. At first, he tried to behave as though nothing had changed. He insisted on maintaining control, pretending her absence was irrelevant. But the heart cannot be fooled for long. It knows when something vital has been removed. It knows when an emotional void opens wider each day. He began to remember her not just as an employee, but as a presence, the gentle way she spoke, the care she put into her work, the innocence that brought a softness he didn't realize he needed. And slowly the truth settled in. Her absence hurt more than her presence ever frightened him. Loss has a way of stripping away ego, pride, and excuses. It leaves you with only what matters, and what you cannot replace. He realized she wasn't just part of the house. She had become part of his emotional landscape. Everything she touched felt different now that she was gone. The rooms she cleaned seemed colder. The spaces she moved through felt empty. Even the staff noticed the shift, though they dared not speak of it. Transformation began not with anger or denial, but with awareness, the slow, painful recognition that he had pushed away the very thing that made his home feel alive. Loss forces a person to reflect. Why did she matter? Why had he reacted so strongly? Why did her innocence unsettle him so deeply? He began to see that she awakened a version of himself he had long buried, a softer, more human version, one capable of feeling instead of calculating. But at the time, he wasn't ready for that reflection. He wasn't ready to admit he cared. Transformation rarely begins with clarity. It begins with discomfort. And discomfort followed him everywhere, through his office, through meetings, through long nights spent staring at the ceiling, trying to understand the ache he didn't want to name. His pride had fired her. His loneliness mourned her. Loss forced him to confront the truth he had avoided. He didn't fire her because he didn't need her. He fired her because he needed her more than he understood, and that frightened him. Life teaches us that certain emotions only reveal themselves after they have been taken from us. The millionaire discovered this lesson painfully. What he thought was a small decision turned out to be a turning point. The door he closed on her became the door he opened into his own emotional awakening. Transformation happens when the heart is forced out of hiding. Loss pushed him to see his own flaws, the pride that controlled him, the fear that drove him, the emotional immaturity that kept him isolated. It made him question not only what he had done, but who he had become. He began to realize he had built a life of success, but not a life of connection. He surrounded himself with wealth, but not warmth. He filled his home with luxury, but not love. Most people only change when something breaks inside them. For him, it was the absence of her presence, the way it hollowed him from the inside out. It was the moment he understood that he had not fired a maid. He had lost the only person who made him feel real. Loss became his teacher. It taught him humility by showing him he was not as emotionally strong as he believed. It taught him vulnerability by exposing how deeply he could hurt. It taught him appreciation by showing him the value of what he had taken for granted. Transformation is never easy. It requires confronting parts of oneself that were ignored for years. It demands honesty, the kind of honesty he had avoided his whole life. But loss left him no choice. It awakened him. It forced him to grow beyond the limits he had set for himself. It softened him where he had been hardened. It reminded him that the heart, no matter how guarded, still beats, still feels, still longs. And as he sat alone in the vast emptiness of his mansion, he understood something he couldn't have learned any other way. Sometimes, losing someone is the only way we realize how deeply they mattered. Transformation does not come through comfort. It comes through loss, the kind that forces the heart to finally open. In a world obsessed with titles, labels, and material status, it is easy to forget one simple truth. A person's worth is not defined by their position in society, but by the quality of their character. The millionaire, surrounded by wealth and accustomed to authority, had unknowingly fallen into the trap that captures many powerful people, the subtle belief that some lives matter more than others simply because of their status. He didn't think of himself as arrogant. He didn't see himself as someone who looked down on others. In his mind, he treated everyone fairly. But fairness without respect is empty, and respect without acknowledgement is incomplete. When the maid first entered his home, he viewed her the way society expected him to as staff, someone to clean, organize, and maintain the order of his luxurious world. She blended into the background like a quiet part of the home itself, not because she lacked value, but because he never took the time to see the person beyond the uniform. This is the tragedy of social hierarchy. It blinds us to humanity. He never asked about her life, her dreams, her struggles, her thoughts, yet she noticed everything about him. She handled his belongings with care, maintained the home with dedication, and treated even the smallest tasks as if they mattered. But her value was invisible to him until the day she was no longer there. Her absence revealed a truth that shattered his assumptions. Respect and worth are not tied to social rank. They come from character, integrity, and presence. The maid carried a quiet strength he had long forgotten existed. Through her gentleness, she displayed resilience. Through her humility, she displayed dignity. Through her silence, she displayed wisdom. She was everything his wealth could not buy, and everything his status had caused him to overlook. He began to see that while he held financial power, she held emotional power, the kind that touches lives without force or demand. She didn't need millions to be valuable. She didn't need influence to leave an impact. She didn't need status to command respect. Her worth came from who she was, not what she owned. This realization shook him deeply. For the first time, he questioned the values he had built his life upon. Was success truly measured by money? Did status determine importance? Was he superior because he had climbed higher on society's ladder? He realized the ladder itself was a lie. The maid, despite her modest position, lived with more grace than many people he had met at elite gatherings. She smiled more sincerely. She worked more honestly. She carried herself with a dignity that came not from status, but from the strength of her spirit. She did not measure her worth by the labels society placed on her. And for a man who tied his entire identity to wealth, this was a revelation. Respect must be given not because someone holds a title, but because they hold humanity. He remembered the way she treated others, the kindness she showed to the older gardener when his hands shook, the patience she offered the new cook as she adjusted to the home, the soft encouragement she gave to coworkers who were struggling. She valued people, she saw them, she respected them regardless of who they were. She embodied a principle he had abandoned long ago. Every person deserves respect, not because of their status, but because of their existence. Her character taught him something he didn't even know he needed to learn. He realized that he had been surrounded by people who respected him for his wealth, not for his humanity. They admired his position, not his person. They followed him because of what he could offer, not because of who he was. But she treated him the same whether he wore a suit worth thousands or a simple t-shirt. Her respect had no conditions. Her kindness had no hierarchy. Her presence had no pretense. And that made her more valuable than anyone in his social circle. Her departure forced him to confront the uncomfortable truth. He had undervalued the person with the purest heart simply because society ranked her lower. He had been blind to her worth, not because it was invisible, but because he had never looked closely enough. True value is revealed when we see someone for who they are beyond their role. He learned that dignity does not come from wealth, but from how one treats themselves and others. That strength does not come from authority, but from character. That respect must be earned through actions, not purchased through power. He began to understand that every person who enters our lives has something to teach us regardless of their status. Some teach us through their intelligence, some through their experiences, some through their resilience, and some through their simplicity. The maid taught him the most profound lesson of all. A heart of gold shines brighter than a crown of diamonds. Her quiet presence held more value than all the luxury surrounding him, and her departure made it painfully clear. He had failed to respect someone who deserved more than he ever gave, not because she was a maid, but because she was a human with a heart far richer than his. Love is not something we schedule, predict, or prepare for. It does not knock politely or send a warning before entering our lives. It arrives quietly, unexpectedly, sometimes through a smile, sometimes through a voice, sometimes through the presence of someone we never imagined would matter. And if we fail to recognize it, if we fail to honor it when it appears, love does not stay, it leaves silently, painfully, completely. This truth became clear to the millionaire only after it was far too late. He never intended to fall for his maid. He never expected her gentleness to soften his hardened world. He never anticipated that her innocent presence would awaken the emotions he had spent years burying under ambition and pride. Love often begins this way, not with fireworks or dramatic declarations, but with quiet, ordinary moments that slowly become extraordinary. He began noticing her without realizing it, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way she hummed softly while working, the way she treated everyone with equal kindness. These small details seeped into his daily life, attaching themselves to his awareness until she became a silent rhythm in the background of his routine. The truth is, love arrives in the details long before we recognize its presence. But recognition requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires courage, a courage he did not yet possess. So instead of acknowledging his growing affection, he fought it. He convinced himself that she was nothing more than an employee, that his reactions were meaningless, that he was imagining the shift he felt whenever she was near. But the heart is never mistaken, only the mind is. He felt something, but refused to name it. He sensed something, but refused to accept it. And because love cannot survive in denial, it began slipping away even before she physically left. Every time he avoided her gaze, love dimmed. Every time he shut down his emotions, love weakened. Every time he let pride dictate his decisions, love stepped back. Love never demands to be seen, but it does expect to be recognized. And when it isn't, it quietly moves on. In the moment he fired her, he believed he was reclaiming control. He thought he was regaining emotional stability. He thought distance would silence the feelings he didn't want to admit. But love doesn't disappear when someone leaves. It disappears when someone is ignored. Only after she was gone did he understand the depth of the emptiness she left behind. The house felt colder, time felt slower, his emotions felt heavier. He had removed her from his world, but he could not remove the feeling she left inside him. Her absence made him understand what he had been too afraid to feel. Love had arrived, softly, gently, unexpectedly, and he had turned his back on it. It wasn't until he saw her again dressed beautifully, glowing with confidence, smiling at another man that the truth hit him with the force of something undeniable. Love does not wait forever. There she was, standing in the light of the dance hall, transformed from the quiet maid he once overlooked into a woman who now captured the attention of someone else. A man who saw what he had refused to see. A man who valued what he had dismissed. A man who appreciated what he had pushed away. And in that moment, jealousy ripped through him. Not out of possessiveness, but out of realization that he had lost something precious, because he never acknowledged it when it was his. He finally understood a painful truth. Love offered itself to him, but he rejected it out of fear. Fear of feeling, fear of vulnerability, fear of losing control, fear of admitting that someone outside his wealthy world could touch his soul. But love does not care about status. Love does not negotiate with pride. Love does not wait for someone to be ready. It arrives when the heart needs it, and it leaves when the heart ignores it. He watched her laugh with another man, a natural, carefree laugh he hadn't heard in his home because she had always been careful, respectful, and restrained around him. She didn't shine less in his presence. He simply never allowed himself to see her glow. Love is like light. If you close your eyes, it doesn't stop shining. You just fail to witness it. He realized too late that she had given him signs of care, not romantic gestures, but acts of humanity and warmth that he had taken for granted. Her kindness was love's whisper. Her presence was love's invitation. Her sincerity was love's reflection. He was the one who refused to listen, and love, when unrecognized, finds a new home, a new heart willing to see it, welcome it, and cherish it. As he stood there, watching another man enjoy the joy he had overlooked, he learned a truth he would never forget. Love does not punish you for missing it. Your own fear does. And the love he once could have had, the love that arrived quietly in the form of a girl with gentle eyes and a kind heart, had now left quietly too, choosing someone who recognized her worth the moment he saw her. Love arrives unexpectedly, but it leaves without permission the moment it feels unseen. And so, in that shimmering ballroom filled with music and laughter, the millionaire finally faced the truth he had spent his life running from. He realized that love doesn't wait for perfection, it simply waits to be recognized. He saw in her eyes everything he had lost, not because she walked away, but because he pushed her away. For the first time, he felt the weight of a regret that no amount of money could erase. He understood that a heart untouched by humility cannot hold on to love. And in the quiet corner of that grand hall, he learned the lesson that would follow him forever. If you let fear make your choices, you will watch happiness dance with someone else. He didn't approach her. He didn't interrupt her joy. For once, he acted not from ego but from honesty. He let her shine, because sometimes redemption is not about getting someone back. It's about becoming the person you should have been when you had the chance. And as he stood there alone, he whispered a truth that finally set him free. I lost her, but I found myself. The dance continued. Her laughter filled the room. And he walked away, carrying the ache of love and the wisdom of loss into a future where he would never again overlook the value of a heart brave enough to love him.